The principles of the Church social doctrine. 1. Meaning and unity. The permanent principles of the Church social doctrine constitute the very heart of Catholic social teaching. These are the principles of the dignity of the human person, which has already been dealt with in the preceding chapter, and which is the foundation of all the other principles and content of the Church social doctrine: the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. These principles, the expression of the whole truth about man, known by reason and faith, are born of the encounter of the gospel message and of its demands, summarized in the supreme commandment of love of God and neighbor in justice, with the problems emanating from the life of society. In the course of history, under the light of the Spirit, the Church has wisely reflected within her own tradition of faith and has been able to provide an ever more accurate foundation and shape to these principles, progressively explaining them in the attempt to respond coherently to the demands of the times and to the continuous development of social life. These are principles of a general and fundamental character, since they concern the reality of society in its entirety, from close and immediate relationships to those mediated by politics, economics, and law, from relationships among communities and groups to relations between peoples and nations. Because of their permanence in time and their universality of meaning, the Church presents them as the primary and fundamental parameters of reference for interpreting and evaluating social phenomena, which is the necessary source for working out the criteria for the discernment and orientation of social interactions in every area. The principles of the Church social doctrine must be appreciated in their unity, interrelatedness, and articulation. This requirement is rooted in the meaning that the Church herself attributes to her social doctrine as a unified doctrinal corpus that interprets modern social realities in a systematic manner. Examining each of these principles individually must not lead to using them only in part or in an erroneous manner, which would be the case if they were to be invoked in disjointed and unconnected way with respect to each of the others. A deep theoretical understanding and the actual application of even just one of the social principles clearly shows the reciprocity, complementarities, and interconnectedness that is part of their structure. These fundamental principles of the Church social doctrine, moreover, represent much more than a permanent legacy of reflection, which is also an essential part of the Christian message, since they indicate the paths possible for building a good, authentic, and renewed social life. The principles of the social doctrine in their entirety constitute that primary articulation of the truth of society by which every conscience is challenged and invited to interact with every other conscience in truth, in responsibility shared fully with all people and also regarding all people. In fact, man cannot avoid the question of freedom and of the meaning of life in society, since society is a reality that is neither external nor foreign to his being. These principles have a profoundly moral significance because they refer to the ultimate and organizational foundations of life in society. To understand them completely, it is necessary to act in accordance with them, following the path of development that they indicate for a life worthy of man. The ethical requirement inherent in these preeminent social principles concerns both the personal behavior of individuals, in that they are the first and indispensable responsible subjects of social life at every level, and at the same time institutions represented by laws, customary norms, and civil constructs, because of their capacity to influence and condition the choices of many people over a long period of time. In fact, these principles reminds us that the origins of a society existing in history are found in the interconnectedness of the freedoms of all the persons who interact within it, contributing by means of their choices either to build it up or to impoverish it. Second, the principle of the common good. The principle of the common good, to which every aspect of social life must be related if it is to attain its fullest meaning, stems from the dignity, unity, and equality of all people. According to its primary and broadly accepted sense, the common good indicates the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. The common good does not consist in the simple sum of the particular goods of its subject of a social entity, belonging to everyone and to each person. It is and remains common because it is indivisible and because only together is it possible to attain it, increase it, and safeguard its effectiveness with regard also to the future. Just as the moral actions of an individual are accomplished in doing what is good, so too the actions of a society attain their full stature when they bring about the common good. The common good, in fact, can be understood as the social and community dimension of the moral good. A society that wishes and intends to remain at the service of the human being at every level is a society that has the common good, the good of all people and of the whole person, as its primary goal. The human person cannot find fulfillment in himself, that is, apart from the fact that he exists with others and for others. This truth does not simply require that he live with others at various levels of social life, but that he seek unceasingly, in actual practice, and not merely at the level of ideas, the good, that is, the meaning and truth found in existing forms of social life. No expression of social life, from the family to intermediate social groups, associations, enterprises of an economic nature, cities, regions, states, up to the community of peoples and nations, can escape the issue of its own common good, in that this is a constitutive element of its significance and authentic reason for its very existence. The demands of the common good are dependent on the social conditions of each historical period and are strictly connected to respect for and the integral promotion of the person and his fundamental rights. These demands concern about all the commitment to peace, the organization of the state's powers, a sound juridical system, the protection of the environment, and the provision of essential services to all, some of which are at the same time human rights: food, housing, work, education, and access to culture, transportation, basic health care, the freedom of communication and expression, and the protection of religious freedom. Nor must one forget the contribution that every nation is required in duty to make towards a true worldwide cooperation for the common good of the whole humanity and for future generations also. The common good therefore involves all members of society. No one is exempt from cooperating according to its one's possibilities in attaining it and developing it. The common good must be served in its fullness, not according to reductionist visions that are subordinated by certain people to their own advantage. Rather, it is to be based on a logic that leads to the assumption of greater responsibility. The common good corresponds to the highest of human instincts, but it is a good that is very difficult to attain because it requires the constant ability and effort to seek the good of others as though it were one's own good. Everyone also has the right to enjoy the conditions of social life that are brought about by the quest for the common good. The teaching of Pope Pius XI is still relevant. The distribution of created goods, which, as every discerning person knows, is laboring today under the grievous evils due to the huge disparity between the few exceedingly rich and the unnumbered propertyless, must be effectively called back to and brought into conformity with the norms of the common good, that is, social justice. The responsibility for attaining the common good, besides falling to individual persons, belong also to the state, since the common good is the reason that the political authority exists. The state, in fact, must guarantee the coherency, unity, and organization of the civil society of which it is an expression, in order that the common good may be attained with the contribution of every citizen. The individual person, the family, or intermediate groups are not able to achieve their full development by themselves for living a truly human life. Hence the necessity of political institutions, the purpose of which is to make available to persons the necessary material, cultural, moral, and spiritual goods. The goal of life in society is in fact the historically attainable common good. To ensure the common good, the government of each country has the specific duty to harmonize the different sectoral interests with the requirements of justice. The proper reconciling of the particular goods of groups and those of individuals is in fact one of the most delicate tasks of public authority. Moreover, it must not be forgotten that in the democratic state, where decisions are usually made by the majority of representatives elected by the people, those responsible for government are required to interpret the common good of their country not only according to the guidelines of the majority, but also according to the effective good of all the members of the community, including the minority. The common good of society is not an end in itself. It has value only in reference to attaining the ultimate ends of the person and the universal common good of the whole of creation. God is the ultimate end of His creatures, and for no reason may the common good be deprived of its transcendent dimension, which moves beyond the historical dimension while at the same time fulfilling it. This perspective reaches its fullness by virtue of faith in Jesus' Passover, which sheds clear light on the attaining of humanity's true common good. Our history, the personal and collective effort to elevate the human condition, begin and ends in Jesus. Thanks to Him, by means of Him, and in light of Him, every reality, including human society, can be brought to its supreme good, to its fulfillment. A purely historical and materialistic vision would end up transforming the common good into a simple socio-economic well-being without any transcendental goal, that is, without its most intimate reason for existing. Third, the universal destination of goods. Among the numerous implications of the common good, immediate significance is taken on by the principle of the universal destination of goods. God destined the earth and all it contains for all men and all peoples, so that all created things would be shared fairly by all mankind under the guidance of justice tempered by charity. This principle is based on the fact that the original source of all that is good is the very act of God, who created both the earth and man, and who gave the earth to man so that he might have dominion over it by his work and enjoy its fruits. Genesis chapter 1, verses 28 to 29. God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members without excluding or favoring anyone. This is the foundation of the universal destination of the earth's goods. The earth, by reason of its fruitfulness and its capacity to satisfy human needs, is God's first gift for the sustenance of human life. The human person cannot do without the material goods that correspond to his primary needs and constitute the basic condition for his existence. These goods are absolutely indispensable if he is to feed himself, grow, communicate, associate with others, and attain the highest purposes to which he is called. The universal right to use the goods of the earth is based on the principle of the universal destination of goods. Each person must have access to the level of well-being necessary for his full development. The right to the common use of goods is the first principle of the whole ethical and social order, and the characteristic principle of Christian social doctrine. For this reason, the Church feels bound in duty to specify the nature and characteristics of this principle. It is first of all a natural right, inscribed in human nature, not merely a positive right connected with changing historical circumstances. Moreover, it is an inherent right. It is innate in every person and has priority with regard to any human intervention concerning goods, to any legal system concerning the same, to any economic or social system or method. All other rights, whatever they are, including property rights and the right of free trade, must be subordinated to this norm, the universal destination of goods. They must not hinder it, but must rather expedite its application. It must be considered a serious and urgent social obligation to refer these rights to their original purpose. Putting the principle of the universal destination of goods into concrete practice according to the different cultural and social contexts means that methods, limits, and objects must be precisely defined. Universal destination and utilization of goods do not mean that everything is at the disposal of its person or of all people, or that the same object may be useful or belong to its person or all people. If it is true that everyone is born with a right to use the goods of the earth, it is likewise true that in order to ensure that this right is exercised in an equitable and orderly fashion, regulated interventions are necessary, interventions that are the result of national and international agreements, and a juridical order that adjudicates and specifies the exercise of this right. The principle of the universal destination of goods is an invitation to develop an economic vision inspired by moral values that permit people not to lose sight of the origin or purpose of these goods, so as to bring about a world of fairness and solidarity in which the creation of wealth can take an opposite function. Wealth, in effect, presents this possibility in the many different forms in which it can find expression as the result of a process of production that works with available technological and economic resources, both natural and deprived. This result is guided by resourcefulness, planning, and labor, and used as a means for promoting the well-being of all men and all peoples, and for preventing their exclusion and exploitation. The universal destination of goods requires a common effort to obtain for every person and for all peoples the conditions necessary for integral development, so that everyone can contribute to making a more human world, in which each individual can give and receive, and in which the progress of some will no longer be an obstacle to the development of others, nor a pretext for their enslavement. This principle corresponds to the call made unceasingly by the gospel to people and to societies of all times, tempted as they always are by the desire to possess, temptations which the Lord chose to undergo. A reference, Mark chapter 1, verses 12 to 13, Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 to 11, Luke chapter 4, verses 1 to 13, in order to teach us how to overcome them with His grace. By means of work and making use of the gift of intelligence, people are able to exercise dominion over the earth and make it a fitting home. In this way, He makes part of the earth His own, precisely the part which He has acquired through work. This is the origin of individual property. Private property and other forms of private ownership of goods assure a person a highly necessary sphere for the exercise of his personal and family autonomy and ought to be considered as an extension of human freedom, stimulating exercise of responsibility. It constitutes one of the conditions for civil liberty. Private property is an essential element of an authentically social and democratic economic policy, and it is the guarantee of a correct social order. The Church's social doctrine requires that ownership of goods be equally accessible to all, so that all may become, at least in some measure, owners, and it excludes recourse to forms of common and promiscuous dominion. Christian tradition has never recognized the right to private property as absolute and untouchable. On the contrary, it has always understood this right within the broader context of the right common to all to use the goods of the whole of creation. The right to private property is subordinated to the right to common use, to the fact that goods are meant for everyone. The principle of the universal destination of goods is an affirmation both of God's full and perennial lordship over every reality and of the requirement that the goods of creation remain ever destined to the development of the whole person and of all humanity. This principle is not opposed to the right to private property, but indicates the need to regulate it. Private property, in fact, regardless of the concrete forms of the regulations and juridical norms relative to it, is in its essence only an instrument for respecting the principle of the universal destination of goods. In the final analysis, therefore, it is not an end, but a means. The Church's social teaching, moreover, calls for recognition of the social function of any form of private ownership that clearly refers to its necessary relation to the common good. Man should regard external things that he legitimately possesses not only as his own, but also as common, in the sense that they should be able to benefit not only him, but also others. The universal destination of goods entails obligations on how goods are to be used by their legitimate owners. Individual persons may not use their resources without considering the effects that this use will have. Rather, they must act in a way that benefits not only themselves and their family, but also the common good. From this, there arises the duty on the part of owners not to let the goods in their possessions go idle, and to channel them to productive activity, even entrusting them to others who are desirous and capable of putting them to use in production. The present historical period has placed at the disposal of society new goods that were completely unknown until recent times. This calls for a fresh reading of the principle of the universal destination of the goods of the earth, and makes it necessary to extend this principle so that it includes the latest developments brought about by economic and technological progress. the ownerships of these new goods. The result of knowledge, technology, and know-how becomes ever more decisive because the wealth of the industrialized nation is based much more on this kind of ownership than on natural resources. New technological and scientific knowledge must be placed at the service of mankind's primary needs, gradually increasing humanity's common patrimony. Putting the principle of the universal destination of goods into full effect, therefore, requires action at the international level and planned programs on the part of all countries. It is necessary to break down the barriers and monopolies which leave so many countries on the margins of development and to provide all individuals and nations with the basic conditions which will enable them to share in development. If forms of property unknown in the past take on significant importance in the process of economic and social development, nonetheless, traditional forms of property must not be forgotten. Individual property is not the only legitimate form of ownership. The ancient form of community property also has a particular importance, though it can be found in economically advanced countries. It is particularly characteristic of the social structure of many indigenous peoples. This is a form of property that has such a profound impact on the economic, cultural, and political life of those peoples that it constitutes a fundamental element of their survival and well-being. The defense and appreciation of community property must not exclude, however, an awareness of the fact that this type of property also is destined to evolve. If actions were taken only to preserve its present form, there would be the risk of tying it to the past and in this way compromising it. An equitable distribution of land remains ever critical, especially in developing countries and in countries that have recently changed from systems based on collectiveness or colonization. In rural areas, the possibility of acquiring land through opportunities offered by labor and credit markets is a necessary condition for access to other goods and services, besides constituting an effective means for safeguarding the environment. This possibility represents a system of social security that can be put in place also in those countries with a weak administrative structure. To the subjects, whether individuals or communities, that exercise ownership of various types of property accrue a series of objective advantages: better living conditions, security for the future, and a great number of options from which to choose. On the other hand, property may also bring a series of deceptive promises that are a source of temptation. Those people and societies that go so far as to absolutize the rule of property end up experiencing the bitterest type of slavery. In fact, there is no category of position that can be considered indifferent with regard to the influence that it may have both on individuals and on institutions. Owners who heedlessly idolize their goods, a reference Matthew chapter 6 verse 24, chapter 19 verse 21 to 26, Luke chapter 16 verse 13, become owned and enslaved by them. Only by recognizing that these goods are dependent on God the Creator and in directing their use to the common good is it possible to give material goods their proper function as useful tools for the growth of individuals and peoples. The principle of the universal destination of goods requires that the poor, the marginalized, and in all cases, those whose living conditions interfere with their proper growth should be the focus of particular concern. To this end, the preferential option for the poor should be reaffirmed in all its force. This is an option or a special form of primacy in the exercise of Christian charity, to which the whole tradition of the Church bears witness. It affects the life of each Christian inasmuch as he or she seeks to imitate the life of Christ, but it applies equally to our social responsibilities and hence to our manner of living, and to the logical decision to be made concerning the ownership and use of goods. Today, furthermore, given the worldwide dimension which the social question has assumed, this love of preference for the poor and the decision which it inspires in us cannot but embrace the immense multitudes of the hungry, the needy, the homeless, those without health care, and above all, those without hope of a better future. Human misery is a clear sign of man's natural condition of frailty and of his need for salvation. Christ the Savior showed compassion in this regard, identifying himself with the least among men. Our reference, Matthew chapter 25, verses 40 and 45. It is by what they have done for the poor that Jesus Christ will recognize his chosen ones. When the poor have the good news preached to them, Matthew chapter 11, verse 5, it is a sign of Christ's presence. Jesus says, "You always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me." Matthew chapter 26, verse 11, Mark chapter 14, verse 7, John chapter 12, verse 8. He makes this statement not to contrast the attention due to him with service of the poor. Christian realism, while appreciating on the one hand the praiseworthy efforts being made to defeat poverty, is cautious on the other hand regarding ideological positions and messianistic beliefs that sustain the illusion that it is possible to eliminate the problem of poverty completely from this world. This will happen only upon Christ's return, when he will be with us once more, forever. In the meantime, the poor remain entrusted to us, and it is this responsibility upon which we shall be judged at the end of time. Our reference, Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 46. Our Lord warns us that we shall be separated from him if we fail to meet the serious needs of the poor and the little ones who are his brethren. The church's love for the poor is inspired by the gospel of the Beatitudes, by the poverty of Jesus, and by his attention to the poor. This love concerns material poverty and also the numerous forms of cultural and religious poverty. The church, since her origin, and in spite of the feeling of many of her members, has not ceased to work for their relief, defense, and liberation through numerous works of charity, which remain indispensable always and everywhere. Prompted by the gospel injunction, "You have received without paying, give without pay." Matthew chapter 10, verse 8. The church teaches that one should assist one's fellow man in his various needs and fills the human community with countless works of corporal and spiritual mercy. Among all this, giving alms to the poor is one of the chief witnesses to fraternal charity. It is also a work of justice pleasing to God, even if the practice of charity is not limited to almsgiving, but implies addressing the social and political dimensions of the problem of poverty. In her teaching, the Church constantly returns to his relationship between charity and justice. When we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. More than performing works of mercy, we are paying a debt of justice. The Council Fathers strongly recommended that this duty be fulfilled correctly, remembering that what is already due in justice is not to be offered as a gift of charity. Love for the poor is certainly incompatible with immoderate love of riches or their selfish use. Our reference, James chapter 5, verses 1 to 6.